Ancient Babylon, modern-day Iraq. The year is 323 BCE, and Alexander the Great is sick. Racked by pain and barely able to speak, he lingers for 2 weeks. As his generals wonder who will inherit his empire, he utters his final words: "To the strongest." On June 11th, 323 BCE, Alexander takes his last breath. The greatest conqueror the world has ever known is gone.
Alexander the Great dies, and his death is going to send shockwaves around the world. In life, he had been this invincible military conqueror who had taken over so much of the world. He was also viewed by so many people of the time as a literal deity.
In keeping with Egyptian tradition, Alexander's body is then mummified.
As ruler of ancient Egypt, he is a deity in the ancient Egyptian pantheon. So they dry him out with salt, they remove his internal organs, they add spices and aromatic resins, and they make him smell like a god. He is placed in a golden sarcophagus, and then he's put inside a funerary bier. This bier, or this funerary cart, is designed like an ostentatious temple.
The entire structure is so heavy, it has to be pulled by a fleet of mules who are also beautifully adorned in precious cloths and jewelry.
2 years after his death, Alexander the Great's funeral procession finally leaves through the famous gates of Babylon.
This carriage is taken on an amazing procession all the way westward, presumably to Greece, to Macedon, where he'd be interred with the rest of the royal family, including his father, Philip II. And as it goes westward, it's going through the cities of Alexander's new empire, and crowds are coming out to see it, we are told, lining up, wishing it well. It must have been amazing.
Of course, when Alexander passes, he's not really counting on dying so early. So there's a power vacuum, and all of his generals want to grab as much land and as much legitimacy as possible.
At some point, as it is passing through Syria, one of the generals, Ptolemy I, hijacks Alexander's body and takes it back with him to Egypt, where he sets it out in a royal city called Memphis. Ptolemy wants Alexander's body because he feels it shores up his own power in Egypt, which he has now kind of taken over for himself since Alexander's now dead.
Alexander's mummy remains at Memphis for an unknown amount of time, perhaps several decades. Finally, it's moved to Alexandria, which was the city that Alexander himself founded precisely as a city on the Nile River, right where it meets the Mediterranean Sea.
We know about the Library of Alexandria, essentially the world's first university. It wasn't just a collection of books. This is where all the scholars came. So this became the intellectual center of the world. And how do you really drive that idea home? You bring Alexander's body and you put it in this beautiful mausoleum. And now Ptolemy can claim, I am the true successor to Alexander the Great. Here's his shrine, here's the library, Alexandria, the new center of the world.
Historical accounts will say that Alexander's body remains in Alexandria's royal quarter for hundreds of years. The Greek historian Strabo, who's writing 300 years after Alexander's death, will speak about visiting the tomb.
In the ancient world, anybody who is anybody goes to visit Alexander's tomb. They want to really pay homage to this great man, and they want to link their own power bases to him.
We have eyewitness evidence from Cleopatra, Julius Caesar, Mark Antony. It seems the whole world traveled to go visit Alexander the Great's tomb there. It was like a festival every time.
But late in the 4th century, all the historical writings about Alexander's tomb stop abruptly.
The last known reference to Alexander's body being in Alexandria comes from about 700 years after Alexander's death. The tomb is mentioned in a letter by the Roman teacher and traveler Libanius, who will speak of Alexandria where the tomb of Alexander is to be seen.
But then just 20 years later, one of the early leaders of the Christian church, John Chrysostom, was specifically going to Alexandria to go visit Alexander the Great's tomb. He wrote, "And I was met with blank stares."
So from Libanius's letter to John Chrysostom's visit, we go from having the tomb of Alexander the Great to nothing. It's like one of the wonders of the ancient world just vanishes from the face of the earth.
But what could have happened to destroy all traces of Alexander's tomb and his remains? In the late 4th century AD, historical records show a tsunami engulfed Alexandria. In addition to this natural disaster, the city is in political and social turmoil.
Christianity spreads throughout the Roman Empire at the end of the 1st century AD, but it's met with repression. The Romans don't like new religions, so they're basically turning the Christians into martyrs.
As Christianity gains strength, conflict between the pagans and the followers of this new religion intensifies, turning pagan landmarks, like Alexander the Great's tomb, into targets.
In the 4th century, Alexandria is a hotbed of religious upheaval, change, violence. The reality is that the rise of Christianity and its movement into power is threatening any trace of the old pagan past.
Alexander was a very religious man. He venerated Greek gods, but also venerated the gods of Egypt. Particularly after his death, he came to be venerated as a kind of demigod or even a god himself.
Alexander believes he's a descendant of the gods. His mother, Olympias, claimed that he actually was not the son of Philip, but he's the son of Zeus himself.
Alexandria had been a very pagan city for a long time, where the Greek gods and Egyptian gods were honored side by side. But by the 4th century AD, the Christians are beginning to really kind of take over the city. What the Christians don't really like is how pagan the city's past really is. And they set out to kind of purge Alexandria from its pagan trappings, to turn it into a new Christian city as much as possible.
In 380 AD, Emperor Theodosius mandates Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire.
Rome is now a Christian empire, and now the Christians are going to do to the pagans what the pagans had been doing to them.
We know that in certain areas, Christians rioted, they laid waste to pagan temples, tombs, other signs of the old ways.
So you can imagine an old pagan temple or an old pagan shrine, even pagan tombs. These things were ripe for destruction.
In 391, the emperor at the time, Theodosius, starts to enact a series of decrees to really stamp out any kind of pagan behavior. So he bans sacrifices. He also orders the closure or destruction of pagan temples.
It's interesting how this is the year 391, which is right in the period when we last hear of Alexander's body being in Alexandria.
It's that time that also we think that the Great Library of Alexandria is also burned. Rampant destruction across the city. Could it be that if Alexander's tomb still was established in the city, is still visible in the city at that time, that was when it was destroyed? That would seem to make good sense of the timing, because it was really only 9 years later that Chrysostom enters into the city and looks for Alexander's tomb, and no one knows where it is.
In Alexandria, there was probably few greater reminders of the old ways than the tomb of Alexander. And he might have been the target of any Christian attempt to erase traces of other religions.